Welcome elders, welcome to all the Northern Suburban citizens. I'm glad you could be here for another year of our assembly where we can ask all the questions we need about where the treaty process is going and move it along towards an agreement in principle. I didn't prepare any written material. I'm just going to give you my history as it is in my head. I was part of the Tribal Council in 1992-93, whenever the first idea of treaty came up. I can't remember who all the chiefs were at the time. I was chief of the Williams Neck Band, and I think Doreen Sellers was chief of Soda Creek. And I think somebody was telling me that Agnes Snow was chief of Dog Creek at the time that I remember. Alkali was involved with us. They were still part of it was the Cariboo Tribal Council back then. There were 5 women bands involved. I'm thinking that Andy Chelsea was the chief when we first got into discussions. But before then, I want to go back a little further in our history. I first got involved with politics in about 1970. The chief of our band at that time was George Abbey. And he had asked if I was interested in going to the Union of Chiefs General Assembly in Victoria. The Union of Chiefs had just been formed in 1969 in Canada, so this was probably their second General Assembly, and I agreed to go on George's behalf. And that was my first experience in politics. There still was no Cariboo Tribal Council, no tribal council at all. What we had back then was Indian Affairs. There was an Indian Affairs office in Williams Lake here that looked after 15 bands in the immediate area, which included 5 Chilcotin bands, 5 carrier bands, and 5 Shuswap bands. And that system is what separated the northern Shuswap from the southern Shuswap, was the way Indian Affairs had laid out the Indian Affairs district, so that they arranged all meetings with the chiefs, and they set the agenda, and the agenda was usually just to tell each band how much housing money, how much, that was it, how much housing money was going to be distributed, because they handled all education, all welfare. Everybody that had to have welfare had to come into town to the Indian Affairs office here. So back then, our chiefs had very little control of the lives on reserve. Indian Affairs would go out to the reserves and meet with the chiefs, usually to tell them what their plans were and what to do. There was no control of our lives, no band offices, no staff, no nothing back then. This meetings that they would call all the chiefs together for was called the Williams Lake District Chiefs Council. And as I said, the only reason they brought them together was usually to divide up, see how they were going to divide up all the housing and capital money for that year. And usually there was no choice of how it was going to be done. They just came and told us, this is how many houses you're getting this year, and this is what you're going to get. And capital was usually very little. So for our band, our first administration was set up in 1972. And our budget for that year was $3,600, which was to pay for the first administrator and an office and all the other expenses. And I was asked to be the first ever administrator, so I had $3,600 to spend for that year. It was a good thing that the Union of Chiefs had been established, because they held a lot of meetings, and they paid for the travel and expenses to go to those meetings. And that's how I ended up going to those meetings and finding out how other bands who had established band offices operated. So that's how I learned how to set up an administration on our reserve. From 1972 when I started till about 1975, that's how it was operated, and all of our bands were becoming very dissatisfied with Indian affairs, telling us what to do and telling us how much money we're getting each year and then how to spend it. And it really got to a point in 1975 where at a Union of BC Indian Chiefs meeting in Chilliwack, a motion was passed where they would call it the rejection of funds, where every band in BC would reject all the funds that were given by Indian Affairs in a protest, saying that we were not going to continue to accept the way they were treating us, running our lives. So everybody went back home and rejected funds, closed their offices down, and didn't go to the Indian Affairs office. And that was, with one exception, was that the people that were on welfare continued to go to town to get, because that was a necessity. And it became a very quiet place. Indian Affairs, now I can't remember, I'm going to have to rely on my memory a lot, but it was shortly after that rejection of funds, I think, lasted maybe about 6 to 8 months before the bands finally went back and continued to accept the funds that were being given. But it was shortly after that the Indian people were still very dissatisfied with the Indian Affairs and the way they were handling things. So, gosh, I'm going to guess on the time when it came to a point where we started having sit-ins, office closures and everything. So I'm guessing it might have been around 1979 or 80 when we finally decided to close the Indian Affairs office in Williams Lake forever. We went in and took over the total office, kicked all the Indian Affairs people out of there, and for about a week we just had people in there 24 hours a day, drumming, singing, some people going through the files looking for stuff. But anyway, we accomplished what we set out to do, which was getting Indian affairs out of our system. And I recall back then that some of the bands that had total reliance on Indian affairs were very, very scared. I remember a chief or two asking me, "What are we going to? How are we going to build our houses when Indian affairs are no longer here? How are we going to get money to do this, and how are we going to get money to do that?" And I remember telling this one chief, I said, "Don't worry, we'll look after each other, we'll help each other." And it worked out. We very seldom ever meet with Indian affairs, or we very seldom ever see one of them. I don't know how many times a year we go to Vancouver, and not one time do we ever go to the Indian affairs down there, because the only time we have to talk to them is when we have to ask them to sit down and discuss what our budget is for the coming year. And as everybody knows, they're cutting down a lot on many of the different programs. And that's the reason why we're working towards the treaty, where we don't have to depend on the Department of Indian Affairs to determine how much we need in our bands to do what we need to do. The sooner we can get them out of our lives, the better our lives will be. And I recall the saying of one of the Nisga'a leaders, I'm not too sure which one it is. He said that the worst day under treaty is better than any day, is better than the best day we ever had under Indian affairs. So that they're saying that there's a lot of problems, but you have the power to fix them once you're under treaty. When you're not under treaty, you're always under the control of the Department of Indian Affairs and bureaucrats from Ottawa who have never even seen BC. They may not even they don't even know what you need at your reserve. And they make decisions about your lives every day. So after we closed the Department of Indian Affairs, kicked them out of town. We started meeting regularly, and then we became the Cariboo Tribal Council, which still included all the 15 bands. And we met regularly because we didn't have no tribal council office in Williams Lake or anywhere. We were just a newly created organization. But we had Fish Lake, just out here in Risky Creek on the military lot. There was a school out there that we went out there and we met regularly to discuss our future. Our future as our First Nations and our future as a newly formed tribal council. And I remember meeting out there with the BC government. I can't remember what minister it was, and we kept asking him, when are you going to sit down with us to talk treaty? And I didn't complete that. I just said, when are you going to come and sit with us? And he misunderstood and he said, well, I'm here. And I had to correct him and I said, when are you as a government going to come and sit with us to talk about our land claims? And that was the NDP government back then. And that was, I remember, when we started pushing for dealing with our land claims in treaty. We formed a As I mentioned, that was the beginning of the Cariboo Tribal Council. Our first office that we ever opened in Williamsburg was right behind the Toronto Dominion Bank over here, just on this side of Three Corners office. It was right on the corner. There was a little mall there. And we want to take a break here. But I'm telling you history that's not written down anywhere, so I hope somebody's recording it. I've started recording some of my memories of Tribal Council history on a website that I got. And because I've never seen this kind of history anywhere in the Tribal Council office or anything. Anyway, we opened the office at the corner of First and Borland, I think it is. We stayed there for a very short time when the idea was brought up because the residential school had been closed. There was empty, and they still had some kind of staff over there. So we brought up the idea, said, hey, let's just go and move in over there. We're not going to ask Indian Affairs or anything. As far as we're concerned, it's ours and our land. Without telling Indian Affairs or anything, we started packing up our stuff and moved it over to the mission, and we opened up our Tribal Council office over there. I can't recall how many years we stayed there. But soon after that, that's when the Tribal Council started breaking up into different Tribal Councils. There's a lot of discord between the Chilcoot, Macquarie, and the shoe shop, so the Chilcoot was pulled away and formed their own Tribal Council, and then the Macquarie did the same thing. That's the Macquarie, Chilcoot, and the Tribal Council, and then the TNG, and soon we all opened offices in town, and in 1993, as was mentioned, or 92, we started talking about the treaty. I remember when we first brought it up, Bruce Mack was the Tribal Council manager, administrator, and he brought the information to us at one of our meetings, and it was a very scary thought for us, because it was mentioned that if we got into it, we were going to have to borrow most of the money to prove or to go through the treaty. We were not in treaty. We talked about it for a whole year and prepared and met with government officials and found out all we needed to find out about what the treaty was about, how much money was involved. And as I mentioned, we were scared as leaders of our communities of getting our communities into debt. But after a year of discussing it, it was decided that we would. We thought it was the best route for us is to go and negotiate a treaty, because we could see at that time no other route. And we were looking at what was happening with the Nishka and other people that were in treaty. Our tribal council at one time took a trip up to visit the Nishka, and it was a very informative meeting. We had I can't remember, there was still 5 bands, but we took a lot of people up there, and it was really enjoyable. We got a lot of information from the Nishka. They welcomed us, treated us like perfect guests. And when we got back, that even encouraged us to work even harder to move the treaty forward. So that's my memory of it. I know the people who were discussing it at the time, Chief Christopher was from Canada Lake. I think Andy Chelsea or Arthur Dick was the chief from Alkali. Agnes Snow was from Duck Creek, Canoe Creek. Doreen Sellers was Soda Creek, and myself from Sugar King. We were the first chief to discuss the idea of treaty. And then since then there's been several different chiefs and councils involved, and they all need to be given credit for continuing along that path until the day where we have the present chiefs and councils that are